Hello, this is Paul Sullivan. Welcome to my PowerPoint presentation here. Before we get started, I want to tell you how delighted I am to be seen by you, how much I enjoy reading your posts, and what a delight it is to be part of this conversation. Um, Incredible educational opportunity, truly. Um, I chose the Pueblos particularly because I didn't really know a whole lot going in, and I wanted to be something I didn't know about. I grew up in Oklahoma, and I know more about the civilized tribes and their history, but I wanted to do something that I hadn't done, and I sure enjoyed it. I went to the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center here in Albuquerque, and I'm kind of doing this presentation through the lens of that institution. So let's jump right in here. The Cultural Center has an enormous wealth of ongoing cultural activities and programs and opportunities. But I gotta tell you, my favorite part is the food. They have some good food, boy, let me tell you. Traditional recipes. You want to know something about a culture, eat their food, and I can tell you there's a lot of love. Uh, really good stuff. Um, Even if you just go look at some pottery and have a meal, you're going to have a good time. So, but it's an ongoing enterprise to educate people, and it's an ongoing struggle to have autonomy, religious independence, and tribal sovereignty. And so, what I've learned is that through education, um, there's really a dark side of people knowing how great this pottery is and people knowing how awesome these archaeological sites are. And there's a dark side for people getting curious about, are there really golden bells buried in the Pueblos? And, you know, with this attention comes um, unwanted attention and unwanted interest because people aren't knowledgeable about the traditions and the culture. And so it's very important that institutions like the Pueblo Cultural Center are active and engaged and giving their view of what is. Um, because without it, it might not be apparent to people that some of the things that they might find on a hike at Bandelier or something should be left alone. Education is important, but perspective is important too, and understanding the Pueblo's perspective in these issues. So here we have, we're starting off with our timeline of life in what we call New Mexico. And I just want to point out that words like Folsom and Clovis, they're New Mexico locations. They're used to name epics of human history. So New Mexico is important. There's a lot of interest in the geology and human history. Um, Lots of structures that are still here. Um, Evidence of large population centers. Um, Questions of how and why and where. We really want to answer these, but we live amongst an ongoing tradition, not an abandoned dwelling. Um, if I go back here, when you look at this period and then now forward, the people that came before what we call the developmental Pueblo are considered by the Puebloans as ancestors, as a common culture, and they are continuing something that's been happening in this area for a long time. So this, to them, it's not archaeology or ancient culture. To the Pueblo, these buildings are sacred. Um, some of the traditions of the Pueblo are that are still ongoing here. I put some pictures of the importance of agrarian a life of excess, of storing that excess. Um, there's tremendous diversity among the Pueblos. It is hard for me right here to sit here and tell you about the Pueblos because we're talking about different languages, different customs, all of that. Yeah, And so you can't just summarily say the Pueblos do this and the Pueblos do that. Um, Here we have the timeline. Here's the last timeline. We got Santa Fe being established in 1610. And I don't want to say a whole lot about the Coronado expeditions or any of that stuff. Gloss over that. The Spanish occupation introduced just a world-changing dynamic where disease, slavery, population decline, centralized communities. The communities became much more centralized around the church. In other words, that means a reduction in the overall number of pueblos. It became necessary to live near the church because they had the excess harvest and you had to get food from them. So it changed pretty much everything. I was really impressed reading the sources that I read and hearing the lectures that I heard in the comparison of the Pueblos to our Greek city-states. The independence, it really struck me. We say the Pueblos, but really that's not how they may have thought about themselves. They might have had a much more independent identity as their own individual Pueblo than a label that included 45 different cities. There are some patrilineal Pueblos. There could be some a feud and trade between the Pueblos, and there's also trade to the south with what is now Mexico, and with the Athabascan speaking people. The cyclical nature of existence, in which our ones that come before us pass on to us, and we pass to the ones that come after, as well as the calendar and how ceremonies are tied into calendrical events. It just reinforces that here we are again in spring. You know, there's a cycle of things, there's a circle of things, and then we're all connected by that. There's no central authority, there's no pope or anything like that. You're kind of defined by your participation in ceremonies along with your relatives, and the value of the religious introspection rather than reading something in a book, as a deep religious experience, and the value of oral traditions. Apartamiento, as we studied in our history class, was a policy that subjected native people to slavery and conscription. There was extreme intolerance, especially when it came to ceremonies, and medicine men were called hechiceros, which is kind of like, I think, a witch doctor. No respect given to any religious activity, and rigorously persecuted, which led to Pueblo revolt. In one of these such rounds of persecution, 47 leaders were rounded up, whipped, sent to slavery, killed, and in a very public demonstration. And this led Pompey, a religious leader, to go to Akiva and Taos Pueblo and have a vision. His vision was of a unified resistance and a return to the old ways. And so it was specifically a religion about um, religious freedom. It was a revolution, I guess, about religious freedom. It was specifically a revolt about religious freedom. Did I get that right? Okay, so um, the Spanish returned. We have Catholicism prevalent in the Pueblos. There's Spanish language, domesticated animals, central government. A lot of times we'd have the local political governor and the religious leader clash over who got to conscribe the Puebloans, and so maybe there was a friction between the politicians and the religious leaders under Spanish rule. The Mexican Revolution treated New Mexico kind of like an outpost, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo included New Mexico into the United States, but it was still a territory. It was under military command. There was conflict between tribes, lots of raids. The horse, was a game changer. And so the raiding parties made life miserable for a lot of people trying to pass through New Mexico as well as live in New Mexico. And then the Texas was causing problems. I'll just say that. And so with the Civil War, there was a resolution to who had the central authority over this area, and the result of that was more forced Christianity. We didn't have a lot of participation in political life or politics or voting or anything like that, and the Western schools were administered by religious organizations, and so there was no religious freedom. It was quite the opposite. It interrupted all of the oral traditions and the ability to pass on traditions. There just wasn't any tolerance for language, culture, anything that was native, and no input onto what should be taught at the schools. So when tribes were subject to the reservation policy, boundaries were established, and the changing of those boundaries caused a lot of problems. And so the Taos didn't have to, they didn't have a Trail of Tears, but the reservation system affected them substantially because when the boundaries got massaged, they lost Blue Lake and the surrounding forest. It became Carson National Forest in 1902. So Taos Pueblo, this is an incredibly sensitive religious issue here. Taos Pueblo immediately wanted the lake back and surrounding area. The ICC ruled for the Pueblo, but wanted to give money damages. And again, here we have the theme of legal remedies, just not what the tribes are seeking here. They were able to exert political pressure in the 60s. And in 1972, President Nixon returned. We have a very happy ending. Thanks so much. And Santa Clara Pueblo versus Martinez. Boy, I love this case. So I love ethical concerns and constitutional cases. And this is a doozy, let me tell you. It does stand for the premise that the United States government does not want to interfere with the intertribal decision making in matters that are concerning the inner workings of the tribe, necessary for tribal existence. So the tribes have sovereign immunity, and there's no private cause of action against tribes on behalf of tribal members for violation of any of the, say, religious freedoms that might be, or sex discrimination in this case, because the Constitution doesn't apply to the tribes in this regard. So it seemed a little severe and unfair in some ways that children that were 100% native are not allowed that status with the federal government. But at the same time, there's a clear line that the court does not want to cross in getting involved in intra-tribal, inter-tribal disputes. Okay, something that's purely about self-governance. So it's one of the few decisions we have that upholds tribal sovereignty. Peabody repatriation. So Peabody Museum holds so many artifacts and remains. It's kind of overwhelming. They've received a lot of money to catalog these remains and return them to tribes. They've started this effort. There's still a long, long way to go. There's some cases, Kennewick Man. There's a case with the University of Alabama. Tribes have been demanding the return of remains and items under NAGPRA, but institutions have been slow to honor those claims. And in 1990, almost 2,000, the remains of almost 2,000 people were returned to the Pueblo of. So it's happening. There's teeth in this law. But if the institutions do not want to comply, or maybe are slow walking things, as long as the funding is coming, why rush it, right? So there can be some movement as far as the rapidity in which these repatriations occur. There is a white hot debate right now as far as ethically sourcing a museum's exhibits. University of Oklahoma was just involved in this, I believe. Was it a Cezanne? No, I can't remember the name now. But there was a famous impressionist piece that was procured by Nazi looting, purchased from the Nazis, and then sold to a person who then donated it to the university. And so when you have slave descendants, Nazi looting, grave desecration, when you look at your museum and you look at what you have in there, and there's cases where Native American professors at Harvard, they're aware that there's a building next to them that holds thousands and thousands of Native American remains and artifacts that were not for any legitimate archaeological purpose. And even if they were, NAGPRA still requires them to be returned. It's not a working condition a professor wants to be. So we have a long way to go, but there is a growing concern that institutions source their materials ethically. So, language, dance, and song. Culinary traditions, I gotta tell you, I can't wait to do more research into that. Politics and religious identity, arts, all of this stuff are really exciting and ongoing. You see the skateboards here. Just really a fun to witness and be a part of and be near. So much going on and continuing. And there's modern problems. A lot of this is jurisdictional, I believe, in my heart. The United States could do a lot better at the federal level of taking care of its responsibilities. In conclusion, we have a vibrant, dynamic, and extremely diverse group of communities that constitute what we call the Pueblos in New Mexico. And, just the tip of the iceberg here as far as diversity goes. I would like to thank you for watching and tell you again how much I appreciate watching what you guys do and being part of the conversation. I hope you enjoy the presentation, and I look forward to continuing our dialogue on these matters. Thank you so much.